Kyle Staver. So nice to meet you in real life.
I got green paint all over me. Hi, John.
Thanks for doing this.
Well, thank you for doing it. This is terrific.
I'm going to try to put as much of your art as I possibly can into this movie.
That sounds good.
Okay. Kyle Staver's narrative paintings showcase Greek myths, fairy tales, Bible stories, and Americana. I wanted to know why these subjects attract her.
Those are the stories that we all share. If I make a painting of Adam and Eve, you might not know any more than I might know the whole story, but we think, oh, yeah, Adam and Eve. There's an apple, trouble. So we're on board. It's like we're holding hands, and I like that. And then when I deviate or I make other decisions about the storyline, you're aware of it. If you start with a story that we both know, it's interesting to personalize it. When I first started painting, I was taking personal stories and trying to make them more universal. What do I mean by that? Well, if you look at Bonnard's paintings, it's his wife in a bathtub. It's about how he lives, the nothingness of his life, and then it becomes this big painting drama. So I just flipped it. I took stories that were not personal. They're not particular stories. They're all of our stories. And then I tried to personalize them, make them my stories.
What's an example?
I have Leda and the Swan, and it's like a post-sex teenage picnic. It's just a whole nother vibe. It's consensual, romantic. The swan is preening himself. The woman is snoozing, and they're on a picnic blanket. So that felt very different than Leda being so betrayed.
Movie genres like the Western go through phases. In a classic Western like Shane, the lead character is honorable. In later revisionist Westerns, the honor goes away. I asked Kyle if she was a revisionist storyteller.
A little bit. When you're a kid, the roles that were available for women in stories, it wasn't so terrific, especially if you were a kid in northern Minnesota, a tiny bit overweight with not great skin. You weren't feeling yourself to be a princess. So I can make my heroines a little sturdier, a little less of a rescue situation.
Gender is a key theme in your art. How has your thinking about it evolved?
Have you watched a 50s or 60s movie? They're really hard to watch. It's hard to believe the stuff that my mother and me as a younger person tolerated or thought was normal. I had art teachers hitting on me. And I thought nothing of it, nothing.
Wow.
And I also went to art school believing firmly in every fiber of me that there was no future in it for me, that I wasn't going to be picked up by a gallery and I wasn't going to be able to make a career of this unless I taught second grade in Idaho. But I don't think the men in my classes felt the same way. I know they didn't. But as awful as that is, being ignored isn't the worst thing that can happen to a painter, especially when they're young. Because if nobody wants anything from you or takes you very seriously, you don't have to perform for them. So that's a very nice thing. And now things have changed. If I have a dealer that has a suggestion for me, it's too late. There's no way I let anybody into my studio at that level.
He's not the boss of you.
Nobody's the boss of me.
No boss, but Kyle does have a remarkable partner. I asked her how she balances the roles of artist, wife, and mother.
I was unbelievably lucky. I married someone who could afford to let me be the childcare person and not have a separate job. It was extraordinary. What I did is I played red light, green light. If it was nap time, I painted. I used to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and paint until 8. I just plugged in where being a mother gave me a little bit of rope. It was hard, but yeah, I was lucky.
Some contemporary painters confronting sexism rely on irony that is as dark as tar. But that is not Kyle's way.
It's important for me to have paintings feel humane and empathetic. That my characters, although they can seem goofy and it's been written that they seem cartoonish, but I think they have a kind of honor and dignity. I don't have any interest in making them ridiculous or ironic. I did a whole series of paintings on Hercules. He was the strongest of all the gods, but the dumbest. I just loved that. He was just this big galunk who was duped into doing all of these ridiculous tasks. He kills this bad lion, and he wears that lion as a hat that just slayed me. But he's like Don Quixote. He may seem like a character to poke fun at, but in fact, he thought he was doing great things. So to preserve his sense of himself, that was really important to me. I've been painting dancers, and I'm in love with tutus right now, but they're really ridiculous. But they were meant to turn these young women into clouds or something, ethereal and anti-gravity. You recognize the innate humor, but also you try and preserve the dignity and humanity of the person that's taking this on.
Kyle's figures are almost always set in the outdoors. I asked her what precipitated her loving descriptions of nature. It turns out that she sets most of her paintings in her childhood stomping grounds.
Northern Minnesota. It's like the screensaver in my brain. When I was a kid, we would spend the summers at Lake Esquagama. And then all around it, there were the woods. My favorite thing in the whole wide world are white pines. They're long-needled, and they swish. And the wind goes through.
Did you ever come cheek to jowl with a bear or a moose?
Oh, yeah. You'd go to the dump to dump the garbage. There'd be mama bear and 14 baby bears. I've seen moose and, of course, a lot of deer. I saw a wolf, and I always wondered, if I saw a wolf, wouldn't it just look like a German Shepherd? No. I had a canoe, and I would go on the lake. There were loons, which are the weirdest, most prehistoric birds in the world. And I can make a loon call. We'd have this conversation going back and forth. But they were on to me pretty quickly because I think I only know one thing in loon. So they would answer back a couple times, then they'd get suspicious.
Okay, Kyle, you gotta do it for us.
Oh, sure.
Kyle has lived on the East Coast for decades now. And when she does go back to northern Minnesota, it can be a bit disconcerting.
I was a little bit afraid of the woods, to tell you the truth. I'd go out for a walk after sunset, and there was no ambient light. I was so unused to how dark the night was. And the northern lights, billions of stars, you just feel like a little piece of fleck that should get back to the cabin. It's kind of overpowering. When I close my eyes and start to imagine something, what I'm pulling them out from is this darkness, the soup of the unknown.
Light is a major character in your paintings.
Yeah, if I hit the rim of something with a light, it begins to tell you that you should pay attention. And then you let something go so that that place where you've asked for attention can shine.
Color is key to Kyle's work. I wondered how she learned to be such a successful colorist.
I think you can't teach anybody color. Color is so personal. Color is a top-level emotive delivery system, right? If you want your paintings to talk, color is a pretty good language. When I'm mixing a color, when I'm thinking about a color, I don't think warm, cool, complementary, blah, blah, blah. I think none of those things. I think, okay, it's October 5th. I'm in northern Minnesota, and it's going to rain in about an hour, and it's cold. What's the green of the sky? I talk to myself that specifically about what I need to be mixing. Then I start to mix until I find something that I respond to. It's in the sky in northern Minnesota on October 5th at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Once you have that green, you say, okay, what does it do to the things that are around it? And so I start to build my color that way. Color and light, they're not the biggest things. They're pretty big. But you know what the biggest thing is? Composition. How the painting fits together. It's really important to me that the painting be very taut. I almost never break the edges of the canvas. I rarely have something that goes off the stage.
Why is that?
Because the minute I break the edge, it's almost like you put a small hole in a balloon and it starts to seep tension. If I believe that those 4 edges are barriers, then I can push against them and I can make the canvas very taut. The tension of one direction to another can't go flying off the edge and lose its structure.
How do you compose your pictures? Do you do studies or drawings before you?
I do a million trillion drawings. I do a lot of watercolors. I'll start working on a painting and then I'll get up against the wall and I can't see my way forward. So I'll start to build it. They're reliefs out of clay. That helps me because although they're invented, they are in the world.
Kyle told me that the hands-on side of creativity has always been very important to her.
I don't feel like John Singer Sargent in my studio. I feel like a coal miner. It's very physical. It just feels like blue collar work to me.
When I asked Kyle about her distinctive style, she seemed dubious.
My style. I can recognize when I see a Renoir, a Titian. All of us artists, there's certain things that have to be in the painting, otherwise we don't recognize it. I think of it as DNA. Somebody once asked me, have I ever painted a figure with a skeleton? Why would I? I've got these Gumby figures. They can do anything I want them to do. My figures are a lot more elastic because I might need an arm someplace where an arm wouldn't go.
I wondered about Kyle's younger days. Where did you grow up?
A small mining town, Virginia, Minnesota, the Queen City of the Iron Range. 30 miles from where Bob Dylan was born.
I guess, like me, you grew up back in the 50s?
50s and 60s.
How did you get started with narratives?
My mother read stories to me when I was a little kid. A lot of Hans Christian Andersen, and those were pretty spooky stories, but marvelous in magic. And I didn't start connecting pictures to stories until I started to have books of my own with illustrations. I would get a book a month. They were fairy tales and the illustrations were quite marvelous. And I began making copies of those images when I was really little.
How about your teenage years?
I used to be a cheerleader.
Oh.
In 9th grade, I got thrown off the squad for smoking, but that's another story. But we had to cheer on the ice. Can you imagine that? Oh, God.
And you probably had skimpy outfits and were getting frostbite.
No. In Minnesota, we had big, thick sweaters and short skirts, but they were made out of probably concrete because it's so cold there. And then when I was 16, I went to a girls' boarding school called Ferry Hall in Lake Forest, Illinois. And I met this woman named Mrs. Moses. She was my civics teacher. And she told me she knew what was wrong with me. And I said, what's wrong with me? And she said, you're an artist. I was blown away. And she said, but it's okay. There's lots and lots of you. And it's a whole world. I didn't know that.
Were your folks thrilled with your newfound artistic identity?
I think my family used to call it flaky. or squirrely. But there was room in the world for that to be a valued characteristic and that I could build a life around it. And Mrs. Moses told me that. So that was pretty astonishing.
Did you start making art after that?
What I had always done was I made cartoons. If I was born now, they would have me on ADHD medication or something because I was pretty wired. But I always had to be drawing. Mrs. Moses helped me take my cartoons more seriously. And this was in the really early 70s. And I got a gig working for an underground newspaper making cartoons.
Kyle entered the Minneapolis College of Art and Design to train as a cartoonist, but that soon changed. Did you have the classical academic realist training at all?
No. When I went to art school, I studied with Sia Armajani, and my heroes were artists making sighted works, doing really interesting and surprising things with materials. I was a sculptor. Then I went to Camberwell in London, and then I stopped making sculpture when I was 30 years old, and I went to Yale to learn to paint. It was an accident that I started to paint. But when I made a painting, I just thought, shoot, I want to do this. I was living in New Haven at the time, and I was a pastry chef for Atticus bookstore, and I had to hire the bakers, and I only hired painters that had graduated from Yale.
Huh.
It was quite a time, and they helped me when I wanted to change from a sculptor into a painter. They had all gone to Yale, and I thought, well, I'm going to go to Yale.
Let me ask you about success.
That's all relative. Knock on wood, I have had some attention in the last maybe 10 years. When I got out of Yale, I wouldn't have even dreamed of trying to exhibit. I had my first show, and it was a group show, and I was 40 years old at the Bowery. I was a member there. I loved the Bowery, and I was there for 5 years, and I had a show every year. I hung it, I advertised it, I framed it. I learned a ton. I always wondered if, let's say, a gallery did want to exhibit my work, can I do it? Can I produce the kinds of paintings that I feel are authentic and engaging to me on someone else's timeline? You know, that was a real concern. But I can. I can.
Kyle Staver has gone on to have solo shows in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Paris, Brussels, and New York. She has been elected to the National Academy of Design and won a Guggenheim. I asked her to sum up her long artist's journey. She responded, Kyle, I don't speak Loon. Can you please translate that?
Oh, sure.
The thing about making art is the longer you're in this, the more doors open up. And you think, I never, ever thought about that. Or are you kidding? I could do that. And that's what keeps being an artist the most astonishing thing in the world to me. Anytime you push a little bit, something else is revealed.
I have one final question for Kyle, but first, let's take a look at some more of her work. I bet you miss your childhood in the woods.
The only thing that the woods were good for when I was a kid was smoking cigarettes, kissing boys, and drinking in any of those orders. And usually all together.
Is your husband going to be upset about your wild child days?
I'll take him into the woods anytime he wants to go.
He's a lucky guy. Kyle, working on this movie has been really fun.
Thank you so much for doing this, John.
And a little heads up for those of you near New York, Kyle will be having a show opening October 30th at the Nino Meyer Gallery.